Good morning to everyone. Thank you. Well, today is the last of our summer series of Ancient Teachings for the Modern World. Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore studied at great depth world religions to find truth in them. And so we do too. Truth is truth, and no religion has a monopoly on it. Different spiritual paths to me are like the spokes on a big bicycle tire. I'm a teacher, I like props, and I tried so hard to figure out how to get the bike wheel off of my bicycle. But imagine a big bicycle tire, and on the outer rim, the spokes don't touch, right? But where they meet in the hub of the tire, they are very similar because truth is truth. Maybe on the outer rim, different religions, different spiritual paths look different. They have different rituals and holidays and colors and rules and dogma and even names for the divine. But at the hub of that wheel, where they merge, there are so many parallels you can hardly tell them apart. I've been trying for a long time and I can't. The hub is where you find the Hindu Upanishads, the Vajrayana level of Buddhism, the Jewish Kabbalah, metaphysical Christianity, as we study here at Unity, and the mystical Sufis of Islam. At this outer rim of the tire, these spiritual paths are more fundamental, more traditional. Wars have been fought over the differences of where the spokes are at the outer level. But at the hub, there is little disagreement between religion and little disagreement between them and Unity's metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. It's a perfect example of what you find at the hub. That's where we are at Unity. That's why we're able to have so much unity in all faiths. In Unity, we've got everybody in our congregation and other congregations all over the country. There are Hare Krishnas, there are Buddhists, there are Hindus, there are every possible religion you can imagine, and they all gel at Unity because we understand religions at that core level where there is no difference. There shouldn't be any difference. Truth is truth. Today, we're going to take a look at Islam. Probably no spiritual path has been recently more misunderstood by Westerners because so many people associate Islam with terrorism, and people fear terrorism. The fact is that terrorists aren't Muslim because true Muslims don't engage in terrorist acts. It's against their religion. In fact, statistically, most terrorist acts in the West involving Muslims are committed against Muslims. They are number 2 on the FBI list on their chart of victims of hate crimes. Also, did you know that the first Muslims who came to this country, because I know there are many people in the West that have told Muslims, they've told me, go back home after 9/11, for example. But the first Muslims who came to this country came here as slaves, brought here by Westerners in the 1600s. Terrorism, it's not good. It's not new. But what we must understand is that there is little valid connection between world terrorism and Islam or any true religion, for that matter. They all clearly say, thou shalt not kill in one way or another. And they all teach love. They all teach caring for one another. So many wars have been fought in the name of many different religions. And I hate to say it, but those people, when they're engaging in those wars in the name of religion, killing people in the name of their religion, are really not, they haven't been practicing their religion. I'd like to begin with some quotes by Muslims that some of you, Donna, for example, Ritter, shared with me, things that you've read in various places that are very interesting. One Muslim said in a recent article, The terrorists have hijacked my religion. The terrorists have hijacked my religion. Another quote is, there are no Muslim terrorists because Muslims don't terrorize. There are Arab terrorists, though. Another Muslim declared, I am deeply moved by the Muslim idea of the interconnectedness of all things and all people. There are a lot of misunderstandings about Muslims. For example, did you know that Muslim women have been highly respected and revered since Muhammad's day in the 6th century AD, when most people in Europe and in the Arab countries were legally chattel property, meaning they had the rights of an animal, basically. Muslim women have always been able to own property, divorce. When they did, they could take their dowries with them, and they're encouraged to study and have good jobs. The Muslim religion has always revered and protected women at a time when no one else even thought of that possibility. 14 women have been nominated to be heads of state in Muslim countries. In fact, the reason why Muslim men can have several wives goes back to the 7th century when Islam began, and a lot of women, due to disease and war and various things, a lot of them with children were widows, and there was no one to take care of them. And so Muhammad allowed men to marry more than one wife so that more of these women could be cared for by actually marrying them, because a Muslim wife is to be treated equally and with respect. Muhammad said, the one who is best among you is best toward his wife. No man has a right over any woman in Islam. It is not the Islamic religion that has recently been so misogynistic toward women. It is the cultures in which Islam is found. And if the Christian or Jewish religion were in those same cultures, I venture to say that it would be the same thing, and Jews and Christians would be accused of being misogynistic. Those cultures probably would have done the same thing if any religion had been there. It's the culture, it is not the religion. We Americans need to understand the Muslim religion because it helps us understand 3.5 million people in our country. 3.5 million Americans are Muslim. And the Muslims make up 1/6 of the world's population of 7 billion people plus. So what is this religion that the prophet Muhammad brought to the world in 610 AD? What is the teaching that the Muslims believe God gave Muhammad? Much like the Jews and Christians believe that God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. It was kind of the same thing. What is this book, the Quran, in which the prophet Muhammad recorded these divinely inspired teachings? And notice that I call Muhammad a prophet. He is considered to be the last prophet. By the Muslims, he is not considered to be the Son of God, like many Christians believe about Jesus. That is a difference between the Christian and Muslim religion. Muhammad was simply the scribe. He wrote down the Muslim teachings that were dictated by God, and as such, he is considered to be a prophet. These teachings were about compassion, justice, peace, and generosity, written at a time when there was barbarism, paganism, war, and injustice everywhere. It was a godsend to those people and a civilizing influence at that time in that part of the world. They were the same teachings as in the Old and New Testaments, which is why Muslims, like Christians and Jews, are called people of the book. All 3 religions use the Bible. People of the book are Christians, Muslims, and Jews. That's the book we are all people of, the Bible. The biggest difference between the Bible and the Quran is that the Quran is written in Arabic. In fact, the Quran, written in any other language, is considered to be a facsimile and not the real thing. Muhammad felt like the Jews and the Christians in those days already had their Bible, and it was written in their language, but that the Arabs needed their version of these higher teachings, and it needed to be written in Arabic so they could understand it. Muhammad didn't understand that the Jews and Christians were actually two different religions. He thought they were both one thing using the Bible. When he did find out, he said he couldn't conceive of people arguing about theology. The Quran, like the Bible, talks about the prophets, like Abraham. Maybe shouldn't have said like, because they talk about Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. And by the way, the Quran mentions Mary more times than the Bible. The Quran teaches people to live an ethical, generous, and peaceful life, which is why there's a great deal of concern among Muslims about the fundamentalist streak of Islam, which tends to be less peaceful. The Quran is considered to be the absolute source of Islam. Forget cultures, forget all that. That all enters into it, but it is the Quran. If it's misinterpreted, it just is. But it is the Quran that is their absolute source. What often confuses Westerners is that there's also something that's called the Sharia, which is a book of Islamic law based on the teachings of the Quran. And there's the Hadith, which is a collection of different sayings of Muhammad. The Quran, however, is the absolute of all of Islam. Everything is supposed to come out of that. Thus, for example, the Muslim religion has nothing to do with some of the restrictions that some of the fundamentalist Arab cultures have imposed on women. None. It's their cultural interpretation. And Muslim scholars say it's an absolute distortion of Muhammad's teachings. So what are some of the subjects and teachings found in the Quran? Well, there are 99 words for Allah, for God. For example, the all-beneficent, the most merciful, the most holy, the creator, the kind, the light, the all-aware, the all-present, all-powerful. Sounds like unity, doesn't it? What is unlike unity is that the Muslims' view of God is a little more like traditional Christianity. It tends to be a God more apart from and beyond us, a creator. So it's less Eastern in that regard and more Western. The Quran tells Muslims to commit themselves to absolute devotion to Allah or God. The Quran urges them to maintain purity of word, action, and thought, and especially to be very generous, especially to the poor, namely orphans and widows, because Muhammad was an orphan. Muslims must give a certain amount of their wealth to charity, and they are the biggest donators in the world to various charitable groups. The Quran asks Muslims to be polite and tolerant. Talk about polite. My Muslim high school students regularly thank me after class for the class, which is not typical of my Westerners. And they often look like they want to change the channel during class. And one of them always used to bow his head to me when talking. He never looked me in the eye. I found out as a sign of respect. I should have been bowing to him. He graduated top of his class at Harvard. Muslim students are usually the best in the class because they revere education and they don't party their way through school. Smoking and drinking, for example, are against the Muslim religion. The start of the Quran is said to be the equivalent of the Lord's Prayer. It goes like this: Praise be to God, Lord of the worlds, Master of the day of reckoning. To you we turn to worship, and to you we turn in times of need. Guide us along the straight road, not the road of those who have lost their way. Now, the very core of the Muslim faith is what is known as the 5 pillars of Islam. Don't confuse these from last week, the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. The first of the 5 pillars is faith. Muslims pledge their faith to one God whom they call Allah. The second pillar meaning it's the foundation upon which it all rests. The second pillar is prayer. They commit to praying 5 times a day facing Mecca. Mecca is the place where Muhammad received God's teachings. That's where their holy shrine, the Kaaba, is found. The Kaaba looks like this huge black cylindrical stone. The third pillar of Islam is generosity. A fixed percentage of their wealth is required in order to help the poor and the destitute. Generosity is the matrix of their ethics. The fourth pillar is fasting, kind of like our Lent, to remind them of their aim. Muslims must fast, no food, no drink, from sunrise to sunset during the month of Ramadan, which, like Easter, changes slightly each year, the dates. Can you imagine not drinking all day in those hot Arab deserts? That's commitment. The fifth pillar of Islam is to make a pilgrimage to Mecca once in a lifetime, if at all possible. This is when they repledge themselves to follow a life of purity, devotion to higher goals, and peace. Muslims are very accepting of other religions, and all over Asia they live peacefully with Buddhists, Hindus, and Christians. I've personally never met more hospitable people during my travels. There are 2 main divisions of the Muslim religion, much like the Western and Eastern Orthodox Catholics. They are the Sunnis and the Shiites. 85% of the world's Muslims are Sunnis. The difference between these 2 groups is, and always has been, who they believe is actually head of the Muslim faith. The majority, the Sunnis, believe that people should choose their own leader, and that started after Muhammad died. The Shiites believe their leader should be a descendant, a blood descendant of Muhammad. So, just so you know, the Sunnis believe you choose your leader, the Shiites believe it must be a descendant of Muhammad. When Muhammad died, the Shiites chose Muhammad's son-in-law, cousin, who was the father of the young boy who would then take over, who was Muhammad's grandson. These Shiite spiritual leaders are known as imams. The Sunnis, however, do not recognize these Shiite imams. Throughout the ages, different cultures have taken religion and twisted it and used it, often unrecognizably, for their own political and economic gain. Islam has not been immune to this. A lot of the Shiite-Sunni problems have, of course, been political, cultural, and economic. Now, there is a third, very important branch of Islam, which is the Sufi group. Sufis are the mystics of Islam, and they go back to Muhammad's time. A lot of people think they're a new group, Pir Vilayat being the modern leader. No. You find Sufis in the Sunni groups and the Shiite groups. Perhaps you've heard of the whirling dervishes. How many people in here have heard of the whirling dervishes? Oh, so Unity Church. The whirling dervishes are Sufis. They are intent on doing such things as whirling for hours in order to annihilate their egos so that they can merge with Allah, with God. You might also have heard of the modern-day Sufi Christian poet Khalil Gibran, author of The Prophet. There's also the famous medieval Sufi poet Rumi. Rumi once wrote, "Alas, don't tell me the Christians are lost. Don't tell me the Jews are lost. Don't tell me the infidels are lost. Alas, my brother, you are lost. That is why everyone else seems lost." Is that not unity? It's easy for us to understand the Muslim faith because we come out of, most of us, the Judaic Christian culture. And Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all people of the book being the Bible. Because of this, our spiritual ideas are basically the same. As spiritual people, we need to be sensitive, though, to the fact that life isn't easy these days for Muslims in our country. For example, one of the speakers at the recent New York World Religion Conference that I attended said that since his youth, he has endured constant insults. For example, when he was a young boy, someone said, "Go back to where you came from." He was confused. He comes from Brooklyn, born and raised by generations of Americans, Muslims. Before his forefathers came to this country, his ancestors for 250 years had lived in Africa. What did they mean, go back home? To some Arabian desert he had never seen before? He said now, a 2- and a 4-year-old, and that it's getting to be time for them to start having to deal with the incessant insults that he has endured his whole life. He and his wife just don't know how they're going to explain it to them. His little girl looks just like Elizabeth Taylor, but her life will not be the same as Elizabeth's. There's a lot of misfortune out there, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misinformation. For example, the term jihad, the literal meaning of jihad, there's several: struggle, zest, effort, striving. It's referring to the inner struggle we all have to wage to rid ourselves of ungodlike things such as anger, hatred, pride, jealousy, lying, backbiting, etc. Did you know that there is no mention in the Quran anywhere of a holy war? Does not exist. So, that holy war that people have interpreted the jihad as meaning, that holy war is the inner war. It bears mentioning that there are Arab cultures where true Islam is not allowed to be taught today. They're getting a very skewed version of Islam. It's just not allowed. So they don't know about some of these things we've just been talking about, what Islam really is and what it stands for, and the fact that there's no word for holy war, which means kill the infidel, and the infidel being another person, not of their faith. That just doesn't exist, but they don't know that. Many young, orphaned, poor, and hopeless children in these cultures, because you know what's been going on in terms of war in that part of the world, and there are so many orphans, and they've been given food and housing, a sense of family, a sense of hope by these militants who have told them that jihad means killing the infidel and that the infidel is out there, it's us. These children have been taught how the Westerners had enslaved the African Muslims in history in the 1600s and sold them in America. They have been told how Westerners colonized their countries, such as Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Senegal, and used them to get rich. They have been told how we all drink and use drugs and live lives of debauchery and materialism and care little for our commitment to God in the West, and that we're dangerous to the future of civilization. Those Arab children don't understand Islam and they have the worst possible picture of us. Throw in the mix a misinterpretation of jihad, and voila, you have a problem. But not because of Islam. It is a political, idealistic, diplomatic, economic, and cultural problem. We must constantly separate the beautiful and peaceful Muslim religion from the cultures who don't like us, some of whom are Muslim. One American man, a Muslim man, recently said, and I quote, "The institutions which nurtured my Muslim identity taught me something very different from what totalitarians call Islam. They taught me the oneness of all life, the unity of all people, the responsibility that I have for all people, which is the will of God, the Creator, Allah. Praying 5 times a day makes me remember this." Bottom line, many of us are cheated of our peace of mind because of our misunderstandings of others. Maybe their religion, in the case of Muslims, their culture, their race, or their social programming. To get over this takes our being willing to see through the eyes of other people, to walk a mile in their moccasins, as my dad used to tell me all the time. Through study and being mindful of our thoughts and opening our minds, we can overcome and live together in peace. Begin to value and have compassion toward others who seem different from us, and we can thus create unity in our hearts, in America, and in the world. We can start with feeling compassion toward the 3.5 million Muslim Americans who are number 2 on the FBI list as victims of hate crimes. They are having a hard time right now. They feel their religion has been hijacked by terrorists. They endure countless insults. They are reaching out to us. In fact, last Christmas, it was 2 lovely Muslim students at Tulane who brought to Unity a big Christmas present of delicious sweets, candy, cakes, and big smiles. Particularly thoughtful because Christmas is not their holiday. It's the Muslims who have asked Unity to host with them an interfaith dinner with Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, and Muslims. So after this summer of truth lessons on ancient religions in the modern world, I hope that you can open up your hearts a little bit more to the unity of all people on our planet. Yes, we often have cultural and political and economic differences that have to be dealt with, but we can certainly at least understand their spiritual paths better and let that be the first step to understanding them and feeling more at one with them. It's all about unity, which will make everyone's life richer, happier, and more peaceful.